Yep, should be good. All right, share the screen now. All right, you should be able to see this. I'm going to expand it. Hopefully it's going to get, yeah, it's bigger a little bit. If you don't want to see my face and just want to read the slides, just hit on the expand icon on the top right of the slides and you will see the slides only. Perfect. Okay. I want to start off by saying that we planned this webinar as a virtual event before the current situation escalated to the point where it is. So Margina and I, we were saying we want to or wanted to try a virtual event with the community and see if that is something that you guys like. And we thought the topic of remote work obviously makes a lot of sense. And in the case of this particular one, we thought we're going to focus on remote hiring. I'm the founder of acework. We are originally a matching platform for remote talent with career opportunities. And we also help companies build their distributed teams and help them transition to remote working. And the first thing that I wanted to say is that right now, the situation that we are all in, I'm guessing most of you are at home, it is not what remote work normally looks like, right? Like I already said, I'm at my parents' house at the moment. My parents are both here. My brother just came. There's a dog here. There's a lot of movement in the house. It's an extraordinary situation, which even for those of us who are used to working remotely is definitely very unique, right? So I wanted to always preempt with that and say, like, this is not what normal remote work looks like. But yeah, regardless, I do want to hopefully give you a little bit of inspiration and insight into how you can hire people that will not come to your office, right? And then in the second step, I'm aware that a lot of you are probably facing the situation that you're still recruiting and you're still hiring people, but now you have to do it from home. So we can also talk a little bit about that later on as well. So yeah, I'd say let's just stay flexible here and see also what kind of questions come in and we can steer the conversation. But to start off, I mean, for everyone who's in HR and recruiting or has hired as a hiring manager, your goal is always just to hire the best person for your open position, right? And when you do that in a place, in a specific location, you just have a limited talent pool of that place, right? If it's Berlin or people that want to move to Berlin, this is your talent pool. But when you, hire remotely, you remove that location and things get a little bit more complex. That's why it's worth talking about what you need to do when you hire remotely in order to really find that best person, right? And when you want to break it down into 3 very simple steps, it's really about attracting the best candidates, then run your selection process to, find the best person, and then onboard your hire, right? Integrate them into your team, get them up to speed, getting them productive. Right, so when we want to start with attracting candidates, I want to start with something that I usually tell all the companies that hire with us or, that I help with hiring, is that thinking that you have access to the global talent pool is actually not true. You have access to maybe a subset of that, right? And that's why, I like putting it in the headline for the webinar or for the session, because it is very appealing. It's kind of saying, okay, now I don't have a location anymore. I could hire someone wherever in the world, and I'm really going to find the most talented person, the person who has done exactly what we're looking for and who fits perfectly into our team, right? But I want people to let go of those expectations, because yes, you will probably find a better person than you would in the city that you're in, but it is still very hard to attract people, especially globally, right? Starting off with your employer brand. That's something that a lot of startups, for example, in Berlin do it extremely well, right? I think Anne has some problems. Can you guys hear me? Can you confirm that real quick in the chat? Maybe Anne has her, okay, good, thanks guys. I just wanted to make sure, that I'm not muted. I am not. Okay. I hope Anna figures it out soon. All right, so employer brand is something that, companies have been doing relatively well for the last couple of years because talent shortage has been such a big problem. And in Berlin, I think there's a lot of companies that have a good reputation that we know. We know their offices. We go to events there, and that's kind of something that you can build that reputation in a location relatively easy. But when you look globally for talent, you're just a name on the internet. I think that's the very first thing that you got to know, especially when you go cross borders. Even companies that have been featured in like German TV or PR and media, as soon as you go across a border, unless you're Google, okay, I give you that, it is quite hard to have a globally known brand, right? So that's the first thing that you need to be aware of, that for most people that find you online, you're just that name. You're a two-dimensional thing on a website. That's the first hurdle that you have to overcome. And the second one is something that people that are experienced in remote working or that are specifically looking to be a remote employee is that you have to prove that you are a remote first company. With remote first, I don't mean that most of your team has to be distributed. You can still be with most people at the office, but it means that your mindset has to be with the remote worker in mind first, right? That means you have a meeting, and instead of having that meeting in a conference room and just having one person come in through like a crappy conference call where they can't really hear everybody and the sound is weird and the video is also weird, make sure that when you run a meeting, run it remotely with everyone. That's just one example of a remote first company. It goes further into culture, proving that, you have benefits or equal benefits for remote employees than you have for people in offices. When you have, free breakfast, for example, in the office, like how can you make that happen for your remote employees? That's just one of those aspects I think that you want to think about, because people still want to work for great companies and nobody wants to feel like that second-class citizen in an organization. So those are the two big things in your employer brand that you need to nail to attract really the top talent that you want. All right, next up is the job description. And I'm going to keep this one brief because I could talk about this for probably hours. We actually developed a guide for how to write a really good job description for remote roles, and I'm happy to send it to you guys. Just let me know if you want it. But generally, there's one big principle, which is that there is no such thing as over communication. Generally, in remote working, the same goes for the job description. You have to really be crystal hyper extra clear what you need, what your requirements are, and what kind of are a must-have, what are must-have criteria and what are nice-to-have criteria, for example, so that you really attract those people that you want, but also deter the ones that you don't want. And the next thing is that when you hire remotely, you can't just put location Berlin or location Hanover. You really need to know how remote can you go, right? That could be countries. We can hire everyone, but it has to be in Germany. The next one is time zones, for example. If you say, oh, actually, country is not so important, like we can figure it out with contractor agreements or something like that. But we want this person to be, plus minus 2 hours from where most people are, our headquarters, whatever, right? That's another fence that you could have. And there's like a number of those that you need to be very clear on so that people can opt out, right? Because there's a lot of people out there looking for remote jobs. And they will apply to anything and everything if it's not super clear that they don't qualify for it, right? So really make your lives easier by being very clear what you need, what your must-have criteria are, right? Third one is getting the word out, right? And I probably know all of you have a semi-great or a great career page, where you have your your values, which is really important, maybe showcase your remote first culture, et cetera, et cetera. But you can only get so far with your career page if you don't have a super strong employer brand that everybody knows about in the, across countries, across borders. And I see you saying there that you want the job description. I'll make that happen. I'll send it in the follow-up email. No worries. Right. So how do you get the word out, right? Job boards. Very obvious one, right? There's specific job boards for remote positions. And some of those get you relatively good quality candidates. But on most of them, you'll get a lot of noise, right? And you have to be aware of that. You have to be aware that when you post there, that you could get maybe 1,000 applications, but you have to write 900 rejection letters, or at least screen the person and then have your applicant tracking system send them the automatic rejection email. But just be aware that there will be noise for sure. You can still be, posting on, let's say maybe industry-specific job boards and industry-specific, like even magazines or blogs. I think that could probably get you better candidates, right? But the other thing is that we've noticed too is that the best talent, right, the people that you want, whether it's remotely or not, they're still at an office, right? And some of those would be great remote workers. Not just that, they would probably also love that flexibility. So you could actually get that person away from that job that they're generally happy with just by saying, oh, you know what, for us, you can work remotely. We don't care, that you are in a city that's 300 kilometers away. You don't have to come here every week, like maybe occasionally. That flexibility can really give you an edge when you go out and you source your talent, right? That's sort of generally saying, flexibility can give you an edge, remote work can give you an edge as well, right? And be very clear about that this is what you require and other things that you don't require, right? If you require travel to the headquarters once, you should probably say that in advance too. All right, so much for attracting. I think once you attract or you do a great job at attracting, you will get a decent sized pool of applicants. But now you want to really find out who's the best person, right? And how do you do that when you will not see the person face to face ever, probably? That can be a little bit challenging. I know some companies that bring people in for the later stages, maybe once. But I encourage you that even if you have people applying in the same location that you happen to be in, run a fair process, right? Don't meet with some people and don't, do video calls with others. I think it needs to be a very equal process. And that's super important, right? That you run a remote first recruiting process as well. But what do you have to look out for when you do that selection? I wanted to start with something that is quite general, and it is something that we realized is so general that we decided to screen for that before we even hand over a candidate to a company. And we call that remote readiness, right? For us, remote readiness is essentially two big chunks. One is what we call the complete baseline of the person having a stable internet connection and knowing their hardware setup, right? Having that video camera, set up and knowing how to, for example, do a screen share, knowing how to, put their camera on, download Zoom, those kind of things. Just have that little bit of experience with technology and tools that remote work requires. But also that they know remote work etiquette, right? That they don't show up wearing pajamas, that they don't show up in a noisy environment, but that they're actually somewhere where you can hear them well, that they have a, semi-professional background, those kind of things, that they show up on time. There's a bunch of those. Then we check for English fluency as well, because we noticed that basically all companies that include remote workers tend to speak English. There's a few exceptions now. Also, we have some German-speaking clients that don't require English so much, but it's generally just something that we screen for. And then the next big thing that we screen for, and that every single remote company we know does, is screening for soft skills that you need to be successful at remote working. And those include a high level of self-motivation, independence, proactiveness, but also empathy, really great synchronous and asynchronous communication skills. Synchronous is basically like this, video calls. Asynchronous can be written, could be an email, could be writing in a document, those kind of things. And all companies do screen for that. And I think that's really important so you can understand, does that person require, has that capability to work at home or work at a co-working space long-term and be successful at it. The next thing is job specific, right? And I don't have to talk too much about this because I guess those of you who are recruiting, this is basically what you do. You check for your hard skills, you check for your soft skills that this person needs to be great at that job that you want them for, right? We found out that the earlier you find out these things, the better, obviously, because you want to save your time in your interviews to speak with the candidates that are actually relevant to you, right? And we do that through screening questions, for example. We don't have cover letters, but we have companies that asks very specific screening questions for every single role. The candidates answer those, and through those, you can already, find that out. Another one are, assessments, take-home exercises, like real examples of your work, and of course, skill-based interviews. I guess those are pretty standard and pretty parallel to how it would work at an office. The third one, and I think I can't stress enough like how important it is to find someone who fits well into that culture that you guys have as a team. And I don't mean culture fit as someone who is equal or as you guys, but more who adds to that culture, right? I think there's a lot of discussion in the recruiting space about this, right? With like, we want diversity and we want to include different, viewpoints, et cetera, et cetera. So but make sure that that person fits in well. And the way you do this, or can do this, again, try and do it through screening questions. On the acework platform, what the companies are doing is they can request the answers to those screening questions either in written format or in videos, right? And we encourage them do maybe a written answer for something where you want to test like a hard or a soft skill for the job. And then you could do a little video to maybe gauge a little bit what the person's values and personality are, so you can figure out if you want to move them forward. And then I think the other ones are also pretty standard, right? Personality tests are becoming more popular. Culture interviews, of course, like with the team, maybe you have someone who's a dedicated person to do that. Sometimes it's a C-level position. Culture fit assessments is controversial as well, but I've seen it work. And then trial runs. I think trial runs are really powerful. And a lot of fully distributed companies use this just to figure out with the last maybe 2 candidates, if you're on the fence, to do like a paid trial for a couple of days and just have the person work with the team is a great way to find that out as well. Right. Okay. Now that we're through with the selection and finding the right person and we have them and we want to make them an offer, right? I want to give you a quick break here, which is often the hardest part, right? Negotiate and close, right? It goes with the salary, signing the contract, and getting them on board, right? That can be complex. It can be complex for remote roles, but I mean, it is complex in general. The general advice that I have here is probably just to identify the potential roadblocks beforehand, know what they are, and remove them before you even get to that point, right? Salary negotiations is something that I have learned. The earlier you kind of get that out of the way, the better. And I know some great companies that do that, not the final negotiation, but at least knowing the ballpark really early on and using it as a really early filter to determine whether or not it makes sense to move the candidate forward. And what we have learned is that a lot of the candidates that we connect to the companies, they actually prefer that as well, right? Like they rather have that very early on in the process, because if the expectations are just too different, like they prefer not to, invest their time into that application process. And I think that's very fair. Right, so trying to figure that out early on is one of the really important ones. Another one is knowing the legality of how you can employ that person. So as I mentioned, right, if you stick to one country and you have an entity in one country, you can relatively easily hire a person who's in a different location in that same country, right? That person will be employed, no complications there. But what happens when you hire someone remotely who is registered to work in a different country, right? Example, Germany, your company's in Berlin and you want to hire maybe a German, but who lives in Mallorca because some Germans like that place. So they move there, it's sunnier. We call it our 17th state. So let's say they work there, they're registered there. How do you employ them there if they don't have an address in Germany, right? The way you do it, there's two ways that do work, right? One is you hire them as a contractor for the time being, right? Which is like technically like a freelancer, but that means that the person has to bill you, right? They have to invoice you. They have to have their own setup in that country with their own tax ID and so on. And not everybody has that. So figuring out if they have that or if they are willing to do this, again, really early on is super important, because nothing is worse than finding that perfect person who's in a different country and then like telling them, oh, by the way, we can't employ you because we don't have an entity in your country. Like we can't legally do that. And then, I've seen contracts fall through because of that. And that is such a shame, right? So figure that out early on and very clearly state where you can hire and where you can employ people as contractors. The third alternative is working with a PEO, like a professional employment organization. So kind of like a third party provider who then hires the person in your name in that country. We do have a partner doing that as well. So if that is something or a problem that you have at any point, like I'm happy to refer you to them. But yeah, that's basically those kind of blockers that you need to be aware of so you can really just close that contract, have the person sign. If you want to do, full on written, send the contracts in advance, have them returned back to you in time. We use HelloSign, which is digitally. It also works perfectly fine. There's DocuSign, all of those things, right? But be aware that with remote employees, that can be a little bit of an additional administrative step. Same goes for getting hardware to them, right? Setting up a laptop and then sending that to them. Do all of that in advance. But that already brings us to onboarding, which basically is that first part of like signing the contract and doing the hardware, right? You have all of that done. The person's there on their first day. Great stuff, right? But now, how do you get that person to feel like they're part of your team as quickly as possible? And how do you get them up to speed as quickly as possible, right? And with that, I think the simplest way to go about it is just to think about what does a great onboarding experience look like at an office? Like when you think back in your career or what you're running with people that work in your offices, right? What are the great aspects of that process that you're proud of, that really make the difference in bringing that person on board, right? And in that process, please identify all of the offline aspects that make you great. Don't let them drop away and forget about them saying, oh, that person's remote, like we can't do that. What you should do is think about how you can model this virtually, right? And there's different aspects, right? So if there's something, where you have like meetings and these kind of things, you can do it through video calls, obviously. But for everything, I would always encourage you to find a very simple online alternative, especially for those who now have to onboard people that were supposed to be at an office, right? You're now all at the home office and you have people starting on the 1st of April. And instead of onboarding them, in your great headquarters with like the cake and, the free breakfast and the coffee and all of that, now they're sitting at home and they have their laptop and like, how do you make them feel great about starting at this company, right? I encourage you to do as much physical stuff as you can, right? That also goes for people that you would always have remotely, right? An onboarding process where you get sent company swag to your house, whether that's just, like a mug and a t-shirt, or it's like the first breakfast package. It makes people feel great. And it makes it also feel real, right? Because right now that company is, for them, it is just a two-dimensional screen. And if you bring some physical stuff into their space, it definitely makes it better. Or it helps them, moving or feeling integrated and included much faster. The second thing is that you should take into account that just dropping in on someone when you work remotely is a lot harder. And I'm sure a lot of you, again, are probably at the home office now and you have experienced that now and you have felt it firsthand. So especially with someone who you onboard and who you want to, drop in throughout the day and just check in how they're doing on their tasks is much harder. So you need to make sure that you schedule regular check-ins, whether that's, once every morning or throughout the day. That really, really helps to have those scheduled times. And if there's nothing to talk about, you can always cancel the meeting. But having those standing meetings definitely helps. And you should take into account that meetings sometimes take a little bit longer if you have like technical problems and so on. You can make up for that, by the way, when you just like jump from call to call instead of like walking to the next meeting room. So I think that kind of levels out as well. And yeah, I gave a really big interview about remote onboarding yesterday, but it's in German. So everyone who speaks German, I'm happy to send that to you guys too, talks a lot more about the different aspects in regards to like emergency onboarding right now because of Corona. Oh, I said the word. I said I'm not going to say Corona today, but I did. But yeah, so I think that's also an interesting aspect to talk about also later in the Q&A or the open networking. I'm going to jump back here. Yeah, that basically segues into an offer that we guys have, or an opportunity for you guys with regards to what we call emergency remote working. It is different from regular remote working, right? But we want to ease the transition for all the companies that are thrown into these environments as much as we can, because obviously it is in our interest to really come out of this like work from home experiment with positive feelings, right? Like I would hate for everyone to go back to the office and being like, oh my God, I can't wait to be back here, and not see anything positive about that remote work environment. So what we're doing is we set up basically a remote work advisory program. It's very pragmatic. It's going to, teach you guys how to be productive as a team. There's a few leadership aspects in there as well. To give team leads a better idea of how to lead a distributed team, which is not super intuitive sometimes. There's a few nice tools there that you can use. And then, yeah, finally, we do want to support everyone who's, in that challenging time at the moment and find that work-life balance, which I think, especially right now, is quite hard to find. And yeah, so I think that's, something that I'll send you guys as well. If you're interested in that, you can reach out. But this is also my direct email address. You can always email me with any questions. Find us on acework.io. There's information there as well. And I'm going to jump to the Q&A first. And I will definitely share that. So whoever, like if everyone has signed up through Eventbrite, like I have your email addresses, and I normally use that to just send the material through that way. And I'll make a note of what you guys would want, right? So it's the job description guide. And then the second thing is the onboarding video. Yes, once it's out, I don't know when they release it, but I'll keep an eye out, and then I will send that out as well. Please also, if you find me on LinkedIn and you want to follow me or connect with me, just mention that we met in this webinar, so I know where the contact came from. Now I'm looking at one question so far, which is, how can companies find a balance between quantity and quality of candidates? Yep, I think that's a very good question. And I think it plays directly into what I said earlier, is that if you, broadcast or publish too far with your job, you're just going to get drowned in applications, but they're not necessarily very good. And I think it is, unfortunately, something that will depend from role to role, and also from, right? So let's say you have you're looking for like a highly specialized developer in, I don't know, they need to do blockchain, unicorn, glitter, special stuff, right? There's just not that many of them out there. So yeah, you probably end up like going out and sourcing that person. I mean, we do that for clients as well, where we just go out and we help them identify people in different channels. And that's, like one aspect of it. But the other one is, you're looking for an online marketing manager or a content writer. Like those, there are so many of them out there. And so as soon as you post that, you're going to get flooded with applications. I think for those, it's really important to build really good gates early on in the funnel to get as much information from people as possible, that you can filter out people really, really quickly. I think that's going to make your life tons easier, right? So as I mentioned, right, screening questions, really important. Another thing is, maybe having them do an exercise beforehand, trying to automate as much as you can, or use something like acework, where we actually do have a lot of those people, but they have all gone through the remote readiness check first, right? So you're gonna save that step for sure, and they're going to be matched based on if they actually fit your requirements as well. Okay, I see questions pouring in. This one I just answered. Brian is asking, what is the most important thing a CEO should know about remote working if the objective is to recruit talent with specific skills? Depends what the skills are, I'd say. I mean, generally, the most important thing CEOs should know about remote working is a good remote leadership, right? There is this saying that says, distance makes poor management visible. I actually think that distance makes poor management worse. So I think as a CEO, like you really need to understand like how you lead across many kilometers, maybe sometimes even many time zones, because also positioning yourself as someone who is great at leading remote teams, you will, attract that talent, right? So if you go out and as a CEO, you reach out to people on LinkedIn saying like, oh my God, like your profile looks amazing. Like I would love for you to work with us, which works great usually, right? Like as a CEO going out doing that. But then you have to, again, prove like, why should that person work for you? And I think proving that you are a great remote leader is probably the main aspect, because people work for great managers, right? Great leaders. And the same goes for remote working. Bastian is asking, any hints regarding hiring in Eastern Europe as a German remote first company? Okay. Yeah, so I think generally Eastern Europe is, quite an obvious place to hire from. Like it's definitely not new for German companies to work with people in anywhere in Eastern Europe for sure. I think important there is that if you are remote first, and you really mean that, is to make sure that you don't think of it as outsourcing, because I think that's one of those things where when you specifically look in countries where that the salary levels are lower, right, and whether that's Eastern Europe or whether that's India or the Philippines as well, those are countries that know that a lot of European companies or US companies are looking for talent there, but they also have that mindset of, oh, okay, like I'm this outsourced, or like this is an outsourced job. And that actually puts quite a big disconnect in between, like, your values and the engagement of the person with the company, because they have that, oh yeah, I'm just an outsourced gig or an outsourced job here. So really important is that when you find that great person in Eastern Europe, is be transparent and honest about salaries. And I would tend to, probably pay that person more in line with German salaries. Of course, not quite, but like, I think what's really important is that you get a consistency of like why people are getting paid how much, which, just puts you in like that equal, like everyone who is remote is treated equally. A company who's doing that really well is Buffer, by the way. So Buffer has a completely, and you can look at that too. So if you were to look at like Buffer salary guide or something, like you can find what everyone is earning at every level of the company, depending also on where they're located. So I think that could be like one of those things you could look at. And if you wanted like another hint, I think for finding those people, that's a little bit harder, right? Like seeing that, when you post on a remote job or to get people from everywhere, just be very clear about like, this is the like location or area where we would hire from. Okay, Lena is asking, do you know the Prescreen and what do you think about its strengths and weaknesses? Prescreen.io. I do not know Prescreen. I will write it down and I would look at it. Thank you, Lena. Okay, here's an anonymous one. Do you have any recommendations for personality test providers, especially for leadership roles? Okay, that's a tough one because there is a few out there and I haven't seen one that I like love, absolutely love. We did use Bunch.ai for a while. They had a like team personality fit assessment that was quite good. I don't love all of these standard ones, like the 16 personalities, although they're like widely used, like DISC is also widely used. But yeah, I think that's definitely a tough question and it's very controversial. So we used Bunch and I think that was quite nice, but they're right now shifting in a different direction as well. Can you detect problematic personalities online? Yeah, good point. I think, yes, you can. there is like a few things I'll probably do, as I mentioned, right? Like at least do the screening questions, ask people to, maybe for a writing sample, we do that as well in our remote readiness assessment. Do these kind of things to at least get an understanding of, like, are they diligent about also answering everything that's required? We've also had candidates that, you know, on paper look like really good candidates, but then they don't answer the screening questions properly. Try and identify it in behavioral interviews, like asking questions or like not leading questions, right? Asking them like, describe a situation where you failed, right? And then listening to those cues, like, does the person describe me the situation? And then also like, you know, take ownership of it and say what they have learned, or do they blame it on someone else, for example? Like those kind of questions I think can help you, you know, to kind of do those personality tests. Another one from Brian, who's asking, how would a visible CEO model how to lead remote teams? Follow-up question. Okay. Model in terms of like what strategy would they use, I'd say, and how do they present that to you know, their direct subordinates? Is that the right word? I don't know. My English escapes me today, I'm sorry. Yeah, I think it is difficult, right? During these times, like I've advised CEOs right now in times of crises, for example, to be even more visible to their teams. One of the suggestions that I gave someone recently was to record video messages to the team and just have that sent out. I don't know, I think they set up WhatsApp groups even, right? Because they shifted from an office to a remote environment and they weren't sure if everyone had access to email. Like it was a big mess. I was like, just use WhatsApp and just send these video messages, because I think during these times, everyone is looking for actually more personal content or more personal messages rather than like a very formal email from the CEO. So I think that's one big one. And the other one, what did I want to say? It's going to come back to me in a second. Give me one moment. Bastian is asking, can you recommend any books, courses, etc. about remote team augmentation or remote first companies in general? Of course, yes. So there's a company called Workplaceless, which is one of our partners. It's run by an amazing woman called Tammy Bjelland. She's an educational absolute mastermind, and she created courses for people to work better remotely together and how to lead better as well. I think they're self-paced, but they also have like interactive elements as well. So it's quite a good one. Books specifically about remote work, I haven't read any, honestly. I do read a lot on like what distributed companies are doing. Like I read a lot on like the Automatic blog or the Buffer blog. Mural has some really great, like also webinars. So like looking for those companies that have figured it out and just looking at their content, I think is highly beneficial, because they are working really hard on their employer brands as distributed teams. So everyone who's in that space wants to work for them. So they get 1,000 applications regardless, whatever they post. So yeah, I think they're a really great resource for sure. Okay, another one from Brian. We lead by showing how to do things. A lot of CEOs have never managed remotely. How do you teach lead what you don't know? Okay. That's interesting. So kind of like thinking, okay, we're shifting to remote. The CEO has not done it before. Everyone else has not done it before. How do we collectively learn and build those muscles, right? I think definitely challenging. I would say do different things, right? Like allow yourself to fail. Very easy, has been repeated a million times, right? Like being transparent about what you don't know as a leader, and that was my second answer to that first question, is be vulnerable and honest about like what you know, what you don't know to a certain extent as a leader. I think definitely helps, showing your personality as well, right? And that creates empathy. And I think empathy is one of those key aspects that you need when you lead remotely. So building that and taking also an extra time, extra effort to listen to everyone and have those conversations that can be more easily avoided as a remote team, right? Those tough conversations, like definitely seek those more. I think that definitely helps a lot. Perfect. I think we're at 3:45 Germany time. I know there's people who are tuning in from other places. So what I would want to do is I'm going to stop the recording right now, and then we can jump to the tables. The tables have different names. So if you see in the top row, I created one for attracting candidates, one for selection processes, one for onboarding, and then two as kind of like let's talk about like we have to figure out remote work right now. So just pick your table. I'm going to jump around a little bit, but I do want you guys to start off the conversation with like, what are we already doing in that space? Whether it's like, how do we already attract candidates remotely? And what are our challenges and how can we do it better? And make it mini brainstormings at each of those tables. So whoever is sticking around got 15, 20 minutes to network right now and wrap this up. Perfect. Thanks, everybody. Bye.